Ms. Page? Mr. Steers? And Mr. Lockwood?
Here.
Do I hear a motion to allow for the electronic participation of Ms. Kristen Swinford due to personal reasons?
I move we allow the electronic participation of Ms. Kristen Swinford due to personal reasons.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Do we want to begin with the presentation?
Yes, we can start with CARES Act. So good afternoon, still afternoon, not quite evening. Thank you guys for being here. So tomorrow, as a matter of fact, I present to the subcommittee of the county for round 2 CARES Act. So this is a little ahead of that, but we had the time together. So I thought I'd share that. But before I get into the CARES Act funding or round 2 of requests, I just want to say what a wonderful experience it has been working with Mr. Hathaway, Chief Opet, Chief Baber, Kim Turner. It really is a team effort because as we're putting together these requests, we're really creating the future. So our round 1 request, we didn't know what school would look like. We didn't know what the support would look like. And so it's been an evolving process and just really appreciate their partnership as we work through these pieces. So our second round of requests, we did it we talked about it at our work session last, a couple weeks ago, as a matter of fact. So I just wanted to kind of talk through really the philosophy behind the request. You'll get to see the descriptions and the justifications and all of those pieces connected to it. The primary driver of round 2 requests will be technology. No surprise since we're going virtual to start and really to offset that start. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to improve wireless connections in gyms and cafeterias. So you may be saying, why are you trying to do that when you're going virtual? Well, what we've done in our gyms and cafeterias, and you may have seen it walking in, is we're really standing up an internet cafe, which I'm not allowed to use that phrase anymore. It's an online access center. So for our students who do not have internet at each of our schools, we've set up a place where they can access the internet. It'll be supervised by our staff and so forth. But now we're gonna have a lot more kids in the common area spaces where we don't have the strength of signal. So that's what that request is primarily driving for. It's that 20 new installs, and it would include pushing it out further into the high school parking lot. So you could be playing tennis, not that our kid would be doing that during the day, and still being able to access the Wi-Fi signal. So really creating the parking lot as a Wi-Fi distribution place. A request that we had on our round 1, and we kept it in the round 2, are staff laptops. Now that our staff is doing distance learning, virtual learning, the Chromebook is not a sufficient device to deliver that instruction. To create content and deliver content on the staff side of things is very different as they work through Schoology and the other programs. So that request is round 1 carryover to round 2. A number of the requests are connected to those staff laptops. For instance, licensing for Google Meet. Google Meet, everybody knows Zoom and everybody is zoomed out at this point. We're on Zoom now. Zoom was very generous during the regular closure, and they took all the limits and fees and all of that stuff off. They're not generous any longer. So now you're relegated to 40 minutes, and if you go over 40 minutes, you have to pay. And for a school system, it's just cost prohibitive to go Zoom division-wide. So Google Meet is a freer service. So it comes up to $7,500 to run the whole school division with that piece. So definitely a more cost-effective measure. As you know, last year we started under a cyber attack. So with these staff laptops, we want to equip them with CrowdStrike, which is the device we use to do the internet filtering and the cyber protection. I do have some technology experts here if I get stuck. Along with the laptop piece are webcams and USB extension stands. What our teachers really basically have to do is now put on their own studio. They are coming into the building. They are teaching from their classroom, but they have to be able to deliver that content. So they need the device to do it, to create it, and then they need the setup that goes with it. So a lot of this stuff goes together. Connected to that, additional production servers, there's gonna be a lot more strain on our system as we now have 3,000 plus kids going distance learning versus being in the building. So our production servers with the traffic going in and out is a request item in there too. There is an item that may be coming off by the time I present tomorrow. So this does continue to evolve even though we submitted last Friday. We were working through during the hybrid part of things on having school-based substitutes in case you had an outage or you had to cover and doing those components. As we're working through that with human resources, Ms. Pitts and so forth, we don't know that that'll continue to be a need. So if you see that shift by 1 o'clock tomorrow, this has been a working document on our side. So when I said thank you to the partnership fees, we continue to shift these components. Probably the biggest item, and not probably, it is the biggest item on there. You know that we've set Chromebooks. We're doing it right now at the elementary schools, Chromebook distribution. Chromebooks in the hands of all of our students. The Chromebooks that are in the hands of our elementary students are in their last year of life. Your life lasts longer when you don't use it as much. I think that goes for a lot of things, but for Chromebooks especially, now that they're going out into the field, we'll have a replacement cost that we weren't anticipating initially. So that's that total right there is about $500,000 by itself. Now in saying that, the flexible and fluid piece, if we need to do half of that, or we need to do a quarter, whatever it needs to be, we can kind of work through those pieces. What we started with was from Ideal, and then in partnership with the county working through those pieces. So 90% of them are technology related. What's not technology related is the ability to, as we were going through our preparations for hybrid, we were looking at filtration systems and HVAC units and so forth. So we do have a request in there to be able to update 6 units. Middle school primarily, those units are coming to end of life and end of parts. And in some of those units, we can't actually put the upgraded filters in it because it will kill the motor because of the life of the HVAC. Mr. Pollock is not here to save me on the HVAC question, so please hope you do not ask one. But all of that is in the description, and you can see those pieces there. Once again, that's a project that's flexible and fluid. If we can't do 6, if we can do 3, anything that gets us further along and allows us to pull some of that out of capital request as well. So that's a high level overview. The county has this document. I'd be happy to give you this document as well, but really wanted to thank you for the partnership and to talk about the technology focus and the request now that we're going virtual. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. I know our board has seen this once already too, and we've made some shifts since then. But since we had the opportunity, we don't have the opportunity to come together often. Wanted to, 1, thank you, and then 2, share some of those requests for you.
So what is the total request?
Great question. $1,092,535.
Dr. Nichols?
Yes, Ms. Swinford.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. I'm sorry I could not be there in person today. I just had a quick question regarding the number of our students so far that have requested use of the internet access centers. Do you have a number that have currently requested to come into the buildings to use internet?
I can get you that number, Ms. Swinford. It's evolving each day. I don't know if Mr. Miller has a number, but one thing for us to keep in mind is that number will grow. To start the school year, we're working on running routes, but day 1, we will not have transportation running for internet online access centers. Now that we know the need, we're building those routes. So I would see that number growing, Ms. Swinford.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Brian, if you're going to have these not called the internet cafes, are you going to be, I think you may have just answered, are you going to be going out, picking the kids up and bringing them here, then bringing them back home, or? Yes,
so the plan is transportation would be provided for families that needed it. We would also provide breakfast and lunch. It's a shortened day, but it fits with the schedule and it'd be supervised by our personnel. So we would have some transportation costs even though we are virtual.
So with all the virtual aspect of what you guys are doing, I would imagine there's, probably, here's the plus bucket, here's the minus bucket. I mean, have you guys got a breakdown of where you're saving some money and where it may be costing you more? And I mean, you obviously operating a school with a teacher in a classroom is a little different than operating a school with a bunch of kids in the classroom.
It is, and there are pluses and there are minuses, and then Ms. Moorheim can jump in and help me. One of the things, so we made the decision and kind of worked through that our teachers would report. Not all school divisions are doing that. They're working from home and different pieces like that. So we won't be able to shut down the building, but we can run it a little bit differently. So Tim Pollock has been working with me on what those set points could be, what areas we can shut down, and those components too. We do believe we'll run fewer buses. So that's a savings. But I will tell you the number of, and that's an agenda item for our actual board meeting later today. One of the things we're watching is student enrollment, and specifically kindergartners who've delayed a year. So you don't have to come when you're a kindergarten, you can delay it. And we have a number of families that are deciding to delay a year. I'm worried about the kindergarten class of 21, 22, because that's going to be a pretty large one when the folks have decided to delay. So each kid brings in money as well. So kind of cost benefit. General Assembly has a bill in front of them right now to hold school divisions harmless for their enrollment, basically keep our enrollment what it was last March. That would be a saving grace for school divisions across the country because of the enrollment implications.
But we won't know anything about that. Is that up at the special session, or is it going to have to wait till
It's
January?
in special session right now.
Brian, and I haven't looked at your individual CARES Act requests, but just listening to you, it seems like most of them are pretty much consistent with the guidelines for CARES Act.
Yes, sir.
Although we may have to get with finance on the substitute teacher one. One of the criteria for CARES Act is you can't surplant already expenditures that are already budgeted in your current budget. And I know you carry a line item for substitute teachers. So we need to just think about how we can document that this is over and above what you would normally spend. I think that's the only one that you mentioned that we have to think about a little more.
And that's kind of the thinking behind, you may not see that by the time you'll see it because you have to pack it, but we may withdraw that by the time we come at 1 o'clock tomorrow. So looking at that piece and now looking at our current staffing, and now that we have our teachers back, trying to find other avenues to provide that same service. Substitutes could be another area we actually save money this year. Or it could be an area we have a lot more money spent depending on quarantines and so forth.
Right. I assume the books haven't been closed out for last year yet, have they?
No, I believe we actually have a meeting September.
Do you have a rough idea of how much leftover money you think you're gonna have? I mean, I know.
We'll present that at our October meeting, and then county still closing some of the months out. We're still working on the two financial systems, so we're working through that. We just got our final state sales tax figures that went through that for last year. So that is something that we're looking forward to hopefully having in our application.
But that could be substantial amount of money.
Yeah, I was smiling as you were asking that question because Amy gets that question from me. Actually, Mr. Beats asked it at our meetings too. We're all looking at that. That could be because we didn't run transportation and we did run our buildings at a different occupancy level. And we did incur some other costs, but I still think we'll be in a good place going in. So, working in partnership, what that looks like and what that.
So you gotta decide, y'all talk about what you think you might do with that money or anything.
The process that we've run before, and I've only gone through it once, is to look at capital projects and
It
try
goes
to
to
get
capital,
on that.
capital is what it's been.
But any one-time costs are, can be permissible with, approvals with it. But I think that's another factor that we have to look at. So, on average, we tend to have some significant savings in a regular year that we're able to apply and do some capital projects.
Spend about 500, 700.
Yes, somewhere in
Over
that.
the last few years.
So we'd anticipate it being greater than that.
There was a time where we were concerned because there was a lot of gloom and doom about the sales tax figures coming in, so there was a lot of unknowns. that we were pleasantly surprised on, actually, that those did not drop as they were being expected to at the state level. Moving forward, though, there are still a lot of variables as we go into this school year. So we've been constantly thinking about staffing. There's a lot of variables about, how schools opening, what that looks like. And keep in mind, we also have 85% or more of our budgeted salaries and benefits. So there are a lot of different variables, like you said, Mr. Lovewood, up and down. So we're kind of weighing those, and we've often had plans A through G, and they're constantly changing. So I think the key is flexibility and really taking it day by day and really watching what will come through the general assembly.
Yeah, I think I won't speak for everybody, I was pretty disappointed in the money that was unallotted for education. And when the governor went back to do it, we received no additional funds for any of those pieces that were unallotted. And then the sales tax revenue for this next 2 years is supposed to be 224,000 less for us this year and next year. Now, that number may vary a little bit, but that's something we have to contend with as well.
Any questions?
And like I said, I'll be back tomorrow at 1 to kind of walk through these in more detail and sit through together, kind of go through it, the practice run.
So when you have that meeting tomorrow, it sounds as if I understand that there are questions that can't be answered, but some of the information regarding cost savings, projections would be great to have for tomorrow. Okay.
And if I may just briefly discuss our schedule for CARES Act as well. The review committee will be meeting with every department that requested funding tomorrow. And at the conclusion of those meetings with departments, we'll be putting together an expenditure plan to present to the Board of Supervisors at their September 8th meeting for action. And definitely we're hoping that it's approved in some form on September 8th, and we'll send notifications out to the departments. The very next day, September 9th. Any expenditure that is approved has to be spent by December 30th. So that's another thing that we'll be looking at as we're considering plans. How feasible is it to make this expenditure by December 30th? But we are looking to move pretty quickly on this plan.
So just to understand, the committee will send their recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, and then the Board of Supervisors will vote on September 8th,
Yes.
hopefully. Okay. Thank you very much.
Will it be another one like it was before?
When the state sent out this notice, they said second and final, and they emphasized final
No, I
round of
mean,
funding.
when we did the first time, we said
Oh.
that we would have another round.
What?
So, to see what was covered and what we had left.
Yeah, yes. There will be, the review committee will reconvene the latter part of this month, September, to look at where we are with first round projects, the progress that's being made in second round projects too. And if there's any additional money, we'll develop a plan to expend those funds too. Our goal is not to send any money back to the state. We want to spend all of it. So we're constantly monitoring projects that are already approved.
Thank you.
So we're going to move to item B, and that's the new elementary school.
All right. I believe we have a presentation that's coming up. So just for introduction, we have Stephen Halsey and Andrew Smolin from Mosley. They're our partners in this project, so we thought we'd bring in experts to for any questions or any considerations and so forth. So I'm going to take you through where we last left off, and then kind of a little bit of what we're working on, try to answer any questions. So cross, if you go to the next slide. Just in way of timeline, so last February, school board adopted a resolution. We had our joint Board of Supervisors school board meeting to discuss that in March. And that was actually, I believe, the day, if not the day before that school's closed. So it was that timing there that we were working on that piece. And at which time, Board of Supervisors deferred the decision on funding due to economic instability and uncertainty and everything. So that was the spring pool. So now we're returning to the fall. So at our last board meeting, the school board adopted a resolution, same resolution that was adopted in February, adopted in August. And then it comes before the Board of Supervisors September 8th. And that would have a fall 2022 opening possible for new elementary number 3. So that's kind of the timeline where we are right now. So one of the things we've learned of many during this pandemic is the need for flexibility. Flexibility in spaces, flexibility in learning, flexibility in absolutely everything. So this is information we received from the VDOE, and it's really square foot per student. So we wanted to look at what does the VDOE see as average square foot per student, and then how does our building compare as far as our spaces. So VDOE's 5-year average going through 2018 is 128 square feet per student. The new elementary school as proposed, and we'll get into that in a minute, is just under 127. So
That figure of 700 kids?
What's that?
That's figure of 700 kids?
750 kids. Yep. 750. And if I'm off on any of this, feel free.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, the average was, the VDOE started reporting square foot per student numbers back in 2010. We update that information yearly, and it's slow sometimes getting reported to the state. So we just looked at the 5-year average from 2014 to the last reported information in 2018. And took every new elementary school built across the Commonwealth during that 5-year time, regardless of size, because it varies depending on locality. But the average of all those projects was 128 square feet per student. And that's a gauge, one of the gauges that we use to make sure that when we're working with our school division partners on new projects, are we kind of in the ballpark of building too little or too much? So that's a good gauge for localities to look at.
Is that 126 or 128, whatever number you want to use, is that per student per classroom?
That's total building square footage, because it varies from locality. So, you know, so a 600 student elementary school might have a smaller gymnasium component, or depending on the locality, they might want a larger gymnasium.
So that's the
component.
overall square footage of the entire
Overall,
building?
exactly.
About the
Every
capacity.
usable space?
And support spaces. It's just the building is 90,000 square feet, and you have 600 kids in it, and it's 350 square feet. So it's
And looking at that space, the flexibility piece is, I've been in education long enough to see that instructional methodologies change from we want an open classroom to a closed classroom to an open classroom back again. Had an interesting conversation with Mr. Lockwood about instructional spaces in this pandemic. Do we need more open spaces or should we have more closed spaces? I mean, through the lens of that, we're looking at it as well. Changing the environment of students with disabilities. In the initial design, there was a lot of thought around mixed use or community use as well. So that provides some flexibility. And then, as I mentioned, unexpected requirements such as the current pandemic. Looking at setting up these online access centers in some of our schools, the high school is better equipped because they have an auxiliary gym that we can utilize. Our elementary schools are not as well equipped just because they have a different level of space and where that space is located. Here it's nice at the high school because as we set up the online access centers, we can basically create an instructional bubble, sort of like the NBA, but not nearly as fancy for our instructional folks. They come in one door, out one door, so forth. And then the online access center is in a different part of the building. So just looking at all of those different requirements and the flexibility associated with it. So looking at our school, you know, how does this design provide flexibility? So we've talked about a few of these pieces in previous meetings, but I'll just go through a couple of them. Those extended learning spaces, so those hallways at each level, they actually provide for additional classroom space at the end of each wing. So by the hallways going out, you can actually put an additional classroom space at the end, and you can see that in our design. So while it says 750, we're also cognizant of the fact that New Kent is still growing rapidly. And we want to make sure that we're not on a property that I think we can bring some trailers in, and I'd rather us not bring trailers into a brand new school, but we do have some flexibility within that space to add additional classroom space. We have, in the current design, there's an auxiliary gym. So it does allow for partnerships with county agencies. It can be a voting location, has an exterior entrance, community use, and additional school opportunities. Right now, we'd be using it for an online access center if it was built currently. There is a STEM room, and we've had a lot of conversations about that. The nice part about that room is it's the size of a kindergarten room. So if we needed to make it an additional classroom, a 5th grade classroom, a 4th grade classroom, whatever, it's an additional classroom space, and we could start out with it at that space. So it's really a holding place for a classroom. There are 2 rooftop learning spaces. Both of those can be converted similar to what we did at the middle school prior to me getting here, where we dropped the classroom unit right on top of the other set of classrooms. You can do that on both of those wings. So there are many opportunities, several opportunities to add additional capacity at the school. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to.
No, it's true, and really what's been happening over really the last 6, 7, 8 years, not only in the Commonwealth, around the nation, is we're moving kind of away from standardized testing and more into group work and individual work and small group work. Having a school environment that has a mix of spaces that can provide opportunities for, at some point, individualized learning, so that they're individualized learning plans for kids. So that we're not teaching to the lowest common denominator or a middle ground, so that kids who need help have the ability for spaces to really give them targeted help, who might need help in math or reading, and kids that are accelerating, to provide small group spaces to allow those kids to continue to flourish. So that's really the purpose of the extended learning areas, and really the STEM room, and having places inside the building that can allow every kid the opportunity to succeed. And that's kind of the biggest shift that I think we've seen as people who support educators is moving away from kind of targeting kind of the middle ground and having schools that support that. The same thing with the auxiliary gym. There was a lot of discussion in the design workshop. We had 25 or 26 stakeholders involved, and having a community asset at that end of the county. The enrollment, we talked a lot about the enrollment, target enrollment of 750, and does that warrant kind of a third PE space for rainy days or bad weather? And we were right on the cusp. Prince William County does a lot of 750 to 900 student schools, and they always have a gym plus an auxiliary gym, so that's a good gauge. We do a lot of work up there. And it seemed to work at that point with the budget that we were putting together. So that was kind of the backstory on the auxiliary gym.
I'd like to add one other thing on the auxiliary gym too, is we also have extra capacity and flexibility for 2 of the pre-K rooms to also be special needs rooms. So depending on the special need population, where that goes in which school in the county. The auxiliary gym also has an aspect of that to have physical therapy and other fitness activities for those types of students. So that was something that rainy days or when other parts of the school like the gym are occupied, allows them to have a space as well if needed.
So there were 2 questions that kept coming up when we looked at the calendar in terms of all the different things that have occurred. You know, we've had Mr. Lockwood has met with these 2 gentlemen and with us at the school. We've had a chair, vice chair, administrator, superintendent meeting. And so the questions that were coming up were related to why this school, why this design, why this school, and then why this cost. Because there was expressed a lot of concern regarding what the school cost. And I think one of the things that probably, if I look back at the meeting that we had, particularly with Mr. Lockwood, there was this discussion that at some point, I'm looking at you two gentlemen, that there was, at some point, the amount, 26 million, school would cost 26 million. So, and you literally went, no, and you're not gonna build an elementary school for 26 million today. Could we just zoom in on that for a minute and you talk about why? Like, why can't you build a school for 26 million?
That, those are kind of old numbers. To go all in, to build an elementary school, all in for $26 million would be significantly smaller. For one, you could do it if you had 450 kids or 500 kids. The only way to do that really in today's environment, even with the pandemic and the uncertainty about the economy, is just to build less. You know, you're dealing with a different level contractor, so they're all, you know, large commercial contractors, heavily bonded at a certain dollar amount. Typically, like to see contractors bonded significantly higher than a bid amount for a project to know they've got the financial stability to deliver the project. There's cost involved in that. It's much different than building smaller commercial projects or housing or residential projects, or even multifamily. It's just a different type of construction. Yeah, these are, in a lot of cases, 75-year investments for a community. So you're building in terms of materials and systems, those types of things that can last over 2 or 3 generations in the community. We do work all over the state, and a lot of times we're tasked with evaluating older school buildings, 100-year school buildings that may not have necessarily historical value, but they can be reused. And so you're dealing with schools that are going to be here for a very long time. So it's just a completely different level of construction and quality and materiality.
And so, I mean, when I hear everyone talk, and I hear people in the community talk, and I read online, a lot of people think that because they know something about construction, that they know someone who's either a builder or somebody who builds, you know, commercial properties. Well, I guess I'd have that question. I'd say, well, I know that I can build this for this amount of money. You're saying that you're looking at durability, you're looking at systems. I mean, I just don't know how we bridge that gap with a community that thinks that it's like building a house or building a building. Why not just put up a big metal building and why not do that?
If you went that approach, you're really not, you know, doing the community any favors in terms of doing an investment. I mean, schools are community assets. They're used in today's environment. They're used after hours. They're used on weekends. They're used by Parks and Rec. They're used by faith groups. They're used by a number of groups, YMCA's, whatever. So there's wear and tear on buildings. So there's an expectation from a community perspective of walls that can hold up, flooring that can hold up long term, that can be easily maintained. And that's not even getting to the instructional environment. You know, that slide right there is a perfect example of the things that you need to have in a modern instructional facility. If you were to go back and build double-loaded corridors with lack of flexible spaces or a variety of spaces, then you're already kind of behind, because those kind of schools we haven't been built in Virginia by school divisions who really focus on that kind of instruction in the last 6 or 8 years.
So that's how we got from 26 mil to where we are today, basically.
Right.
They're old numbers.
Old numbers.
Well, I mean, we've been talking about building a school for 8 years, so that's
Right.
about right. That's about right. When we first started asking, they were 26 million.
Right. I mean, if you were to take that, if that was a number, go back to a period of time, if it was an all-in number, total project cost of 26 million, if it was 8 years ago, you can just inflate that forward and kind of see what that number would be. And we monitor inflation through our own bid network. We do probably 40% of the schools in the state, so we've got a pulse on what things cost probably better than anybody. And we have detailed information in our database about CSI sections and monitor costs. We've got algorithms that we kind of look at inflation trends. We can take a project that we did or a group of projects that we did in a certain period of time. We know what they cost on bid day. We can inflate those forward at a certain rate to the day. We can inflate those forward to bid date. And we monitor everything reported to the VDOE. And over the last 18 years, inflation for school construction in Virginia has been about 6%. So that, and then we look at different, we look at different snapshots. So when we do an inflation model, we like to capture a boom period and a bust period, because we also monitor that on a yearly basis, so that in 2007 or 2008, I can't remember what the graph was, we saw a spike of about 22% one year. And we all know what's happening in that period of time. That was kind of at the end of that boom cycle. And then it was flat in 2009, but in 2010, I think it went down about 10 or 12%. So, you know, school construction in general kind of experiences those kind of big peaks and valleys based on the things that kind of drive construction costs. So if you average that over a period of time, you get something that's significantly different than the price of bread and gas and milk. Two different kind of industries altogether.
So the question I would have would be, on average, with all of the 95,000 square foot buildings that you've done, when you look at the cost per square foot over the last 5 years, is the $35 million an average?
The 35 million is total project cost. That includes.
Well, I mean, but I'm saying though, I mean, I know there's some other factors in there,
Right.
obviously with land cost, land acquisition. But if you just take the raw building costs, take the land acquisitions out of it, take all of that out of it, what is the average square foot price for the building itself based on that 95,000 square foot building? Are we in that same ballpark?
We bid this project at kind of the high point of the market. So we bid a project in October of 2019, about an 84,000 square foot addition to the Holiday Elementary School in Henrico, but it really just doubling capacity. So it was really a new elementary school built onto an old elementary school. It also had some demolition and some complexity of how it touched. And we missed our estimate by $3,000. So we were pretty good that day. So we then took those numbers, because we had used kind of a blended, we take 4 or 5 elementary schools to start with the initial budget for this project. We updated the budget for this project based on the numbers that we got for Holiday. We had good coverage. We had 5 or 6 contractors and a tight spread. And at that point, we actually took a little money out of contingency, because we were still carrying the 10% project contingency. And at that point, we had a pretty good idea of what the site work was going to be, the off-site work. And as we were kind of getting into construction documents, we took, I think, about 1.5% out. So we got down to maybe 8.5%. And adjusted those square foot costs. So we had a really, I mean, it was comparable size, comparable materials, comparable kind of spaces inside with the flexibility of spaces and the extended learning areas. So we felt really good about where we were budget-wise, just based on the recent history of a comparable school in a comparable locality. So we were, and frankly, surprised at anybody the numbers we got on bid day, because that's not what we were expecting. And you know, we had really good data from 4 months prior to that.
We just don't get together with the Board of Supervisors very often, and we're really glad to have you here, and we want you to ask questions. We want these 2 gentlemen to come here and be able to ask any questions that you have.
So while we're in school, I want to raise my hand.
Yes.
Speaking of recent data, this is coming from the Virginia Department of Education, the annual cost data report, and it pertains to elementary schools, new construction for the 2019-2020 year. And Chesterfield County's got 4 schools that all had a contract award date in 2019.
Mhm.
And they're all rated at 794 capacity. They're all 800 to 900 square feet larger than the school that we're looking at.
Mhm.
And they all come out at somewhere between 24.3 and 25.5
Mhm.
for building cost and site costs. And site cost includes water, sewer, and all that other stuff that's in there, according to their report. So if I take that number and I add the $6 million worth of furniture and stuff y'all need inside the school, we're at $31 million. That's $7 million less than we're talking now. I mean, these are like about as recent numbers as you can get.
Sure. That
So-
school was they've actually built that school 8 times now in Chesterfield. They've got 4 more that are opening. It's a prototype from a competitor firm. And it's about a 10 or 12 year prototype. So it is double loaded corridors. It's about as simple a building as you could build in today's environment. And it's frankly, from a education architect's perspective, it's very backward thinking in terms of that school.
Well, I keep hearing about all the different models of educating kids that we keep going back and forth, so maybe we should maybe take a step back. I mean, it's, you know, if we keep changing the way we're gonna educate kids, are we just gonna keep building like prototype schools as we go along? Because it's really difficult for me to look at this and say, you know, Chesterfield County kids get a good education, New Kent County kids get a great education, and the schools that we're dealing with now are way behind their schools. So
So
I
I
think
guess I'm
there's a-
confused because I think the term prototype wasn't clear. Because prototype means they build lots of those schools, so, right?
Just over
It's a
and
bulk.
over and over.
And so there is a financial benefit if you're gonna build, I mean, how many schools did you build in Prince William that are prototype? Because we had this conversation.
Probably 12 or 15 of
If
2
you're
or 3
gonna build
different
12
models.
schools in a county, you're gonna cut somebody a break for building those 12 schools, and you build all the same.
this is not the
schools.
same contractor building every school, Gail. I mean, it's not like one guy gets all the gigs, you know, they're out competitively bidding each individual school to build them.
Right.
The prototype we're talking about is the design of the school. So, you know, you might save some money on building and engineering design, but the cost of construction isn't going to change much from one school structure to the next.
In the case of those schools, once that first number is out there, then everybody kind of knows that's the market number. So
I'm okay with that.
if you,
I'm okay with it costing
but
$7.
that was a specific point in time. So that first building, if that first school, I think they were bid in batches of 2. So there were 4 groups of 2. So there was some economy in there. So there weren't actually 8 projects. I think there were 4 projects, 2 groups of 2. I think they might have structured it so that they could have combined the bids or picked the lowest of both. I have to go back and look. But if you bid, if that first batch was bid in kind of a low point in the market, because I mean, we weren't totally humming on all cylinders in the beginning of 2019 in terms of construction. So if those first 2 projects were bid, then that kind of tells the market what the number is. So that everybody knows kind of what the number is to play ball going forward. So that's why there's consistency. One thing the VDOE doesn't really capture a lot is kind of offsite cost. There's a lot of nuance in kind of the site cost. Is it just purely site development cost? Is it numbers that it takes to bring water and sewer and other services to those sites? Because they had a number of those sites were greenfield sites. They had to bring services. A lot of those sites were same site replacement, so it wasn't as much site cost. And then Beulah was same site replacement. Reams Road, Harrogate were all same site replacement.
Well, demolition's not cheap either, so.
It's
You know, if you're taking
cheaper,
down-
cheaper than bringing new services to a brand new site. You know, it's about $6 a foot to bring a building down that doesn't need to be painted by 8 if it's more. So, you know, if they're tearing down 50,000 square foot building, old buildings that have trailers, you might be looking at $400,000 or $500,000 to bring a building down versus 2 or 3 or 4 to do site improvements to make a greenfield site work.
I just find it difficult that, you know, we're building the top dollar schools when we don't have a top dollar economy in New Kent. And for me to look at the price of schools, regardless of how many are being built, I understand the economy of scale with that, but it still doesn't change much when you're looking at a school that's comparably sized.
I understood it that we were building the median, that it was, we were
We are
priced
not
per
building the
square
median.
foot. We are priced 127 on an average of 128, correct?
In terms of a square foot per student, yeah.
And that is.
That's
that is
square
the-
feet of space, not dollars.
Right, per square foot, because that's how, I mean, that's even how you pay for pretty much any structure that you build is per square foot.
No, those numbers were, as a comparison to school side, those weren't dollars per square foot, they were a square foot of space provided per student.
Is there a
This is the size.
breakdown? I mean, sometimes I worry about how we compare. So is there a complete breakdown on that money, on that total cost? Does that total cost include all site costs, architectural and engineering fees, technology equipment, clerk of the works, and furniture? What
No, it
is-
doesn't include furniture. It doesn't include the items that you have on the second page,
Right,
which is what I just said. So,
right. So what,
so we're coming in about $4 million per school higher. Actually, a little more than that. It comes in about 25 and a half. You add your 6.5 million, we're at 32 million. That's $6 million in savings. Yeah, I mean, you know, and so we're taking a look at all the technology and all, you've already got it broken down as what it's going to take in the school. So to me, it's a case of, you know, we're sitting here looking at $298 cost per square foot. And the other ones in Chesterfield are somewhere 256, 266. You know, you save $4.
But we're not able to benefit from economies of scale.
Well, we could if we were, I mean, no offense to y'all, but if we were buying something that's available already.
We're not putting
You're
a
not, it's not a
contract for
commodity,
middle
sir.
school
You're
and an
not buying
elementary
anything.
school.
You're really dependent on the market.
So we couldn't go to Chesterfield and buy a set of plans from their architect?
No. I mean, you would go to, well, you would go to Chesterfield owns those drawings now. They part of the agreement that a lot of localities, the instruments of service are either owned by the design firm or as part of the deal, they're owned by the locality. But you couldn't just go to Chesterfield, buy those plans and then put them on the street. Chesterfield owns those. If you were to do it from another architect, you couldn't, if you saw another building that you like, they still have to be re-engineered, redrawn, and have somebody else put their seal on it. It's just, it's not just us, what the design business is. We're not really a commodity. It's not really, it's not like you open up a plan book in the grocery store and say, I want model XYZ of house. It's a lot more goes into it and should go into it because it's not about living, it's about, the instructional environment of the students and the teachers and the staff. And, those schools were built off of a 10 or 12 year prototype. They built that school a lot. It's been built 2 or 3 times in Suffolk. I think it's been built a couple of times in Isle of Wight. It's a very, very
So I guess,
basic
okay,
school.
so you almost answered my question there. They're taking the same school and they're using it in other localities. So it is something of a commodity other than the engineering for that specific site.
So to draw a true comparison between the two, you really need to do, we're not going to be able to do it today, but you've really got to break it out into all the components to do that, to see if they're really equal. So is the building design, does it have programmatically everything that New Kent has defined as necessary for the program to deliver education? Are the materials to the same durability and maintenance that New Kent has defined as necessary for our school? Is the bidding environment the same for both? Those schools were bid a year before, and even though if you escalate at 6% and it doesn't equal, are there other variables that factored into it? So there are a lot of things that if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of it, we need to really take some time.
I understand
and do
that.
evaluation.
And I guess the point being though, Sarah, is that these schools were awarded at the absolute peak last year, June, August. I mean, you couldn't get a higher price for construction than that. So I would say that, from the standpoint of the bidding environment and all that, we're in a much better position today than we would be a year ago. So it all just kind of points back to maybe it wouldn't even cost that much to build that school. I'm not, I wasn't involved when y'all were doing the whole thing with this, with the community groups and all that stuff. But I did look at this again today. and not once that at least my eyes could see, is there anything on there about cost or price? And that to me would be the starting point.
Well, that is the starting point, actually, because any state agency or public entity, there are basically 4 variables that really we have to pass these gates. So the first one is, does it programmatically meet our needs? So when that word bubble was developed, that was at the time when the community got together and said, we need X number of classrooms, we need to have all these types of spaces. So number one, programmatically, does it meet our needs? Then, efficiency of materials and design, energy efficiency. So so those are 2 things that have lasting cost effects. And then the third is environmental quality. So that's not just being green for the sake of being green, it's indoor air quality, it's daylight, it's making the space really habitable for the people in the building. So those are fairly stringent. There's not a lot of room for excess.
But there's also, the fact that most of those requirements that you're talking about are universal in a school.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't imagine that Chesterfield's breaking all the rules to build a cheap school. So it just kind of goes back to, if they can, why can't we? And, I drove by a couple of their construction sites. They're building a nice brick school. It's not like it's a metal Butler building, with some cutout windows on the side. So, I'm
sure they should look good, they should look good in quality. And Chesterfield, their building schools are going to be around for 50 to 100 years. So I don't doubt that, but I do think if we really want to draw the conclusion, we need to really spend a lot of time looking at it. If we're going to base our decision on how Chesterfield is building schools, then we really need to make sure that it works for New Kent.
I think that it kind of, I keep going back to, I totally understand that we need a new elementary school.
Well,
And I just can't help but think, but do we need this one? Do we need something that falls more in line with our budget, our ability to buy what we need, not necessarily what we want?
honestly, I think most schools wouldn't have $15 million to put down on top of a school at a time where the bond rate's so low that you've got free money. The thing that frustrates me, and you're gonna hear frustration in my voice, is that, and I understand we have new board of supervisors members from when this project started, but darn it, why did we bother to ask the community? Why did we get the community, not just teachers, board of supervisor members, Rodney? There were people on the committee that sat and met for weeks on end. I don't know how many meetings. And they did that to build a community school. So darn it, don't come and vote in the school. Darn it, don't come and have neighborhood sports activities in the schools. There won't be room because we're gonna have to reduce the square footage. We wanted to build a community school for everyone to use at an end of a county where people didn't have those resources. And lots of people got together and a plan and a timeline was made. And darn it, I've been around long enough to know that we've known for a long time we were gonna need this school. 8 years ago and more, we knew we needed it. And we had to we're trying to squeeze everything on a 15-acre piece of lot because we didn't have the land. And darn, we had to sit there, and I sat in that meeting, and I remember you, and they were moving, trying to figure out, how do we get the buses in? And how do we have enough parking for everybody? And the whole darn community was involved in that. And now we're down to, why don't you guys just pick the school? Why don't you do it? Since you've decided that 26 mil is the cap, why should we have community input? Board of Supervisors, you guys do it.
Well, I am concerned that District Board Supervisor isn't here, Mr. Downstairs. are you all able to get with him to answer any questions that he may have?
Absolutely.
I mean, he may have already made up his mind prior to this meeting, I don't know, maybe he felt that this wasn't something that was necessary.
If I can
Yes.
speak on his behalf, Mr. Steers is not here because he is been hospitalized. So it's not that it's not a concern of his. He's in the hospital as we speak.
Well, we do need to get the information to him anyway, one way or the other.
I mean, we're down to the wire again, because when do you have to know whether you can borrow in the fall pool?
Before we answer that, Kale, I am new to the board, as you well know. So it's a little frustrating for me too, because 6 months ago, we talked about what are we going to do to reduce the cost of school construction? But when your timeline had it, April, wasn't it? When we deferred? You and Brian were both in the meeting and we talked about what can we do to reduce the construction costs of this school. And until we got together a couple of weeks ago, I hadn't heard one thing about what we were going to do. So we're down to the wire. You're right. But this is, darn it, this is not the way that we should be going about this. So, we've basically wasted almost 6 months of time where we could be sitting at the table talking about what we're going to do to move forward. And we're at square one where we were 6 months ago.
Well, I think we have information that has been requested that actually goes over reductions that can be made. The question is, do you want to make those reductions? That's, I mean, if you want to continue to move forward.
Well, Mr. Lockwood, just so you know, these reductions have been made since April. So immediately after the bid, we sat down with the apparent lowest bidder, sent us a value engineering list. Mosley, Tim Pollock on our team, Sarah Barber, went through those value engineering reductions and had that list ready. We had that list ready
A week and a half after we took this.
a week and a half after. We didn't sit in any way, shape, or form. If you want to reduce the price of this building, we need to reduce square footage, we need to reduce capacity, and then we have to go out to bid because it's a fundamentally different project. If that's the decision we need to make that decision, and then we go. What we can do with this building under this contract, if we move in this contract, is value engineering. And I've got a list, and I won't share the list publicly because we're not in a contract, but we have a list of nearly $1 million worth of value engineering. That is the extent of what we can do under this piece. Anything else requires additional cost to Mosley to redesign. I believe we shared some of that with you. We've looked at taking the auxiliary gym out. We know exactly how much that costs. We didn't do that for the meeting. That's been on the books. We looked at the middle school size gym. We don't have to have a middle school size gym. We can have an elementary school size gym. We know what that costs. We have 2 different versions of what that costs. That was not information that we just gathered. That's information that we've had. It's really how do we move forward? And do we need to go down to 650 or 700 kids? Do we need to take out these pieces? We can do all of that, and we have all of that, but I don't want the public for 1 second to think we waited from April to this point now to come up and move forward.
Then why weren't
We're
we talking about it?
Well, I believe we've had a pandemic that we've been working through and working to get schools and go through those pieces. And
I know, but we have email and Zoom and I mean,
But we offered, I mean, Mrs. Page had asked for information and we invited her in to come and look at all of the materials. You wanted to meet with Mosley and we requested that we all meet together. You could have asked to meet us sooner. Anybody could have asked to meet us sooner. It's very difficult for us, all of us, to get a date on the books. We all know that. We're all busy. We all have day jobs. We're busy. But to get all of us together, I mean, we could have done that sooner.
I mean, we could have, if you had the information, you couldn't have shared it with us then?
well, Mr. Lockwood, let me say this.
That doesn't make sense.
If you had the questions you had and you expressed tonight, why didn't you share them between the last meeting and tonight?
I came across this information recently. I mean,
Just in fairness, I mean, this is gonna be a 2-way street. We can talk anytime about anything to move this county. We're all in it together. We just have to do it. We're ready.
Is the Board of Supervisors asking the school board to reduce the cost of the school formally?
Board of Supervisors asked for that in March.
So you're saying that if we can get the school to 26 million, we can get a school, which means that we're just gonna have to cut a gym or something?
I'm quite sure that at our meeting, that Mr. Steers asked the school to go back and reevaluate and come back with a lower price. I'm quite sure he said it at that meeting.
So how much of a lower price is the Board of Supervisors looking for? Because we need a target, but we also need a realistic target, because we know 28 million is no longer the value for a school of this size. So what is our target that we need to hit?
I would have to call Mr. Steers and give you a call.
So is it just Mr. Steers' decision, or is it?
I think if the whole
Got
board
four-
decided
well, you
that at
got
that
400.
time, as the superintendent said, at that time, and since that time, we've been going through a pandemic. So it's not just the school board going through a pandemic, the county's gone through a pandemic. I think we all understand that. However, and because of that, that's exactly what was said in the meeting, because we had so many unknowns coming up because of the pandemic. That's what was stated in our Board of Supervisors meeting. And they asked that the school would go back, see if they could lower their costs and come back with a lower cost. And he gave all the different numbers that we had gotten as late as, 2 years ago. He gave those numbers in the board meeting. Can a school be $30 million? Can it be $30 million? I don't know.
A school of some size can be 30 million,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The thing is, you never know what it's gonna be except on bid day. You don't, we've built estimates and we carried them for years, but you really never know until you open those bids.
Can we go back to bid on the same
Wait a
school?
minute, let me just say this. So we went out to bid, and I think it's comfortable to say that all the bids were in the same ballpark. Is that?
We got,
They're very close, I remember.
we got 6 bids and 3 bids within $400,000 or so.
Okay,
So that's
hear
a
that,
tight, that's a very tight bid.
hear that, closed bids. They were talking to themselves. And we got bids within $400,000. No one came back with a $26 million, or $28 million bid. They didn't think they could do it for that.
For this school.
Do you think the I know lumber prices, I know they've gone up about 30-40%. But I know that everybody's looking for work. Do you think rebidding it would, what kind of percentage do you think would rebidding it cost, or could it roughly be the same?
So the other thing is, we wanted to go into closed session. And we wanted to go into closed session with you, because there is information that cannot be shared publicly. You know that, you've been in meetings where you cannot share. Your attorney indicated that we could not go into closed session with you on this bid, because it was our responsibility to do it. So now we're between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand, people want information, you want every little detail. You want to make the decision. And yet your attorney says you cannot go into closed session with us because it's our decision to make. That puts us between a rock and a hard place.
I never feel.
Well, we all did.
So I think I have, or I may not.
No, we do.
Okay. I have a slide kind of showing you the crossroads that I feel like we're at, and any guidance in this would be helpful. So we do have a list as far as value engineering with the current bid, that we have that list. So really kind of see 3 pathways moving forward. So we can continue with the current bid and negotiate those VE items. Another thing that we talked about, and Mr. Evelyn mentioned pots of money in capital, we have in our capital budget trailers, cottages. We're not going to need them this year. We do believe that we can make it another year without them. Willing to put that transfer that into the school budget as well. That's another $250,000. And that plays out across any scenario. So continue with the current bid, negotiate the VE items. So timeline for a final figure, we can have a final figure to you in weeks with that, okay? We cannot move forward with a contract with the current lowest bidder without the funding piece. So you see, that's sort of the catch-22 there. And then fall opening 2022. Another option, which I've heard some support for, is to reissue this current bid, the current bid that we have with or without those value engineering options. We can do the value engineering, put it back out to bid, see what the market's gonna be. Once again, we don't know what it's gonna come in.
If we were to do that, would we still be able to meet a fall of 2022?
Well, and this may make Mr. Hathaway nervous because he and I talked timeline. So working with Mosley, we would believe we'd be able to reissue that current bid with or without the B. So put that in there.
What type of engineering costs roughly is that going, I mean,
What's that?
what's it gonna be when you reconfigure the value engineering? There's gonna be some type of engineering design costs from you guys.
That's on us. We've got a contract language that we need to get it into a budget number. I think that's being the, speaking for Dr. Harding, is kind of what the number is. Is it the original 34.9 and change that we worked through the design process, or is it some other number? I mean, that's kind of the target number. We would need a target number, but
You think you value engineer it, you would be in that figure?
I couldn't even speculate. I mean, conventional wisdom suggests in today's market that we would get a lower number, but as you mentioned, material prices, I mean, you understand the world we're in, because that's why when we have inflation discussions with others who don't live in this world, it's much different than milk and bread and gas. You're dealing with labor, if we have more stringent border controls, it means it's reality, it's a different influx of labor, material costs around the world, steel, aluminum, copper, all that kind of stuff. That's why construction varies wildly. So conventional wisdom would suggest that we might see a lower number, but for me to guess is absolutely negligible. I couldn't even guess.
So we think we could run that process and be pretty close to the county's timeline as far as the fall funding pool, bond pool, and have to make a decision. So we want to time it with that. You need to know how much money to borrow and how to navigate that piece, and also the cost with it. And then the third option, because we've looked at a number of these things, mostly pulled a prototype from Prince William as well. How much would that cost sitting on that specific property? We could reissue the bid and reduce the square footage. One way to bring this cost down is to reduce square footage, the primary way. The problem with that is that would be some significant re-engineering that would not be out to bid until January.
So that would be that, I guess that's what I was getting at. If you eliminated that auxiliary gym, you'd have to do some redesigning. Is that on you too?
That would be a different discussion.
Because that would be a redesign.
That's what I was.
Yeah, more of a redesign. The key stuff, absolutely. That's part of what we do to make sure we try to get something that works. Yeah.
So that would not meet your fall bond timeline at all. But it would include the B reduction. We estimate we save almost 1,000 square feet with the adjustments. So that provides some significant adjustments. Now with that, we have no auxiliary gym, and we go back to either option to have a middle school size court and no bleachers, or completely reduce that to an elementary gym setting. So those are three pathways, and maybe those aren't the only pathways forward. Maybe there's a fourth one. But that's kind of where we see it right now through everything we work through. But we have an extensive list, and looking at value, I'm more than willing to meet with anybody, with Mosley, without Mosley, and kind of walk through those pieces line by line, and kind of show you what you get for it and what the cost benefit is to doing it, or grief benefit, or whatever the case may be. So
if you go into the question with the bond pool, and I don't know who would have the answer for this, if you go into the bond pool with a $30 million, $35 million number, and you don't use $35 million, can you still stay in the bond pool? That's you know what I'm saying? Is that if we get in and say, hey, our cap is 35, but if we don't use, and we don't need the 35, or whatever happens, can we still stay in that rate with that bond pool, or is it capped at a number?
Well, once we commit to an amount, we're stuck with that amount. And we have to commit to amount by October 6th. that's when the bond sales agreements are due.
Well, we have 15 million in the bank, right? So I mean, it could
No.
flex with that.
We have a little over 12. I believe we have 12,353,574.
So if you were to borrow 25 million or 20 million, and then
You're saying offset it by the cash?
that I mean, if it came in lower, you would offset that difference by the cash. Right.
I had that discussion. What's happening there? To your point there, on option 3, if we went ahead and got in the pool, if we went here and said we want a certain amount of money to be determined, we could still get in the October pool while they were redesigning, right?
Well, actually, the application deadline was today to get into the pool, which we submitted our application, I believe, last week. So we're in the pool right now.
Do you have to have a set of plans to,
No, it's
You
just
have to
a
have
matter of
numbers,
saying,
right?
it's just a matter of telling the state that we want to be in the pool. We intend to borrow up to this amount.
so right now, I mean, I just kind of look at all options on the table. You said we wouldn't meet the fall bond deadline, but actually we could.
Well, if we put this out to bid though, back out to bid, we're not going to have an exact number to
Still don't have the
ask
exact number
for.
to borrow.
Right, to
okay.
borrow.
But I mean, you don't have a rough idea what, I mean,
And, well, I mean, we could go on a guess, but the problem is, you know, if it's over, if our guess is over, we have to borrow that amount. We just have additional money. The real problem is if it's under, and we need additional funds, we're gonna have to look for some additional funding.
And so, excuse me, your name, sir, again?
Stephen Halsey.
So to your point, and to everything that I'm hearing, if you were surprised at the bids and how they came in, then imagine what, not only the Board of Supervisors, but the school, you all had to be surprised as well. And so I think that becomes, I don't want to say the issue, but it was a surprise. Okay, so I just want us to be on one accord with that. If you were surprised and you had to give it to us and you do this, then of course we are.
Right.
Okay.
I don't discount that at all.
Okay.
We felt like we had a good budget to begin with, comparable projects, and especially the project that was bid 4 or 5 months earlier in Henrico, that was same quality materials, same types of spaces, same types of systems, and even factored in a little bit of nasty renovation connection. And then we adjusted the budget for this project based on, and those are good numbers too. We had, and again, we were off, our estimate was off by $3,000.
So we came out of March retreat with no doubt. And so then came the pandemic. So
That we
that's
were-
my whole point. It's like everybody, it's not lost on anybody in this room, the pandemic.
Right.
And the amount of energy that has been put into making sure that everybody in this county is safe.
Just another question on that bond pool that you might be able to help out with, Rodney. If we borrowed that $35 million, and let's say it only, the construction cost was reduced, do we have to use that extra money for that school, or can you allocate that money for other capital improvements in other schools?
No, you do not have to use it for that school, but it has to be education related. The expense.
Okay. Oh, I mean, the only reason I say that is because then obviously the concern is the rate that we're able to get, we wouldn't know what that rate would be at the next bond pool. And if we, I guess my point is that it's not like that we don't have capital projects for future expansion within our division, that the money would not be advantageously used in a way that it would probably be the cheapest money we could ever use to do capital projects if we had capital projects to use. I guess that's my concern.
Well,
I think it becomes, we
my
gotta pay them.
concern is, you know, our payback is based on us collecting a certain amount of taxes from
Right.
citizens. So, I think we need to be upfront with the citizens. If we
Sure.
have to increase taxes an additional 1 and 2 cents, 2 pennies on our tax rate, that's what it's going for. It's our hope, it's our expectation. What I've been working towards is actually being in a position to not have to increase taxes again, to move forward with this school. But in order to do that, we're going to need to know an exact amount and utilize the cash that we already have on hand to go towards this project.
So is the $12 million that we were talking about earlier, is that the only amount that the county has in savings and investments?
It's the only amount appropriated or allocated to schools. It's not the whole, we have a cash reserve, we have
What about in
contingencies.
total? What about in total savings and investments?
Oh,
for the
gosh.
county?
Our reserve is about 30, I'm sorry.
Yeah, our reserve, we keep a 15% reserve. But we also have cash available
How much
for pay to go as far as the capital projects are concerned.
So what is 15% equal approximately?
No, around $11 million.
So over the 12 million.
Yes.
And then we
have policies we have to
that-
keep.
that requires to keep.
Right, I understand days on hand. and
Yeah, to
county.
be balanced.
Right. But that's it, though. That's the savings account for the county.
So at 35 million, you're saying, right, if I hear correctly, if you go into that bond pool, the way that we would technically have to pay for it is we would have to increase taxes.
At 35 million, no. I think we might be okay at 35 million. If we go above that, then yeah, that's a possibility. We may have to increase taxes.
It's for the debt service, correct?
This is for the debt service. And this is, contingent on rates still staying as low as they are too. If we're able to lock in, then there's a good possibility that we would not have to increase taxes.
But this does not include any Colonial Downs / Rosie's money in.
It does.
Okay.
Part of that $12 million, that takes into account an allocation of, I believe, $4 million of Colonial Downs money. Is it 7?
It's 4 million.
4 million.
Other questions for Mosley?
Just to throw one more thing out there. So we came in around 37 million, roughly, good change on. If we're able to do the VE, the trailer capital money pushed towards it. And I keep thinking back to Mr. Evelyn's question about savings and different things like that this year. If we were able to pay for some of this furniture and do some of it, we could further drive down this cost with the existing piece and get really close to 35 million. So we have more options than just those 3 pieces that we can work through as well. Even if we went down road 2 or road 3, there are other things we can do to work collaboratively to try to drive that down. So we've got some avenues.
Can you give me a rough idea of your timeline of option 3, just to be clear?
Timeline as far
I
as.
understand the other 2, I'm just trying to get all 3 of them.
So option 3, we've done an initial, I'll let you guys talk about with the auxiliary gym and the.
Yeah, it would, we would really try to avoid touching the site, so we keep the site permit review in place. So some of the square footage things, we have to kind of try to make sure we keep curbs and impervious area and this kind of thing. If we reduce impervious area, we're fine, but not impacting permitting. It's probably 2 months to do the changes. the drawing changes, and then another, you put on the street, so 4 or 5 weeks on the street, and then you get a number back, call it 10 or 11 weeks after we start changes. So that puts you, having a number by the end of the year, maybe,
To put us into the spring.
But it just depends on what the square footage target is. If you start looking at classrooms and those kind of things, I guess it means working collaboratively with the county, making sure we don't have to alter site plan. The site plan's been, it's been a very smooth process, but lots of moving parts because we've got the building, we've got the off-site utilities and the road improvements. So sometimes those things are kind of wound together. So we want to make sure we don't unwind that by changing the, really kind of where roads and curb cuts and those kind of things are. But that's kind of the first phone call, is to talk to the county about if we do X, Y, and Z, what does that do to site plan approval?
Well, option 2 doesn't cost us anything, correct? And you could, how long would that, I mean, you do the value engineering.
Right.
Working with the Heartland, they could give you a number within.
Well, what we did, we never finalized numbers. We got, about 10 days after we received bids, we got a number of items that had ranges. So we never really took it a step forward without really entering into a contract. That'd be.
And I completely understand why you
Yeah.
can't say something, I get that.
So we have an idea of what those things are, but you won't know until you put it back on the street, or you put pen to paper with Heartland and to negotiate that stuff. A pretty good negotiating spot now because
I like to play poker.
they've given you a range. They've given you a range, and they continue to want to do work. I get phone calls from their president almost every other week, and I'm sure he's watching this right now. They want to do the job, no question, I can say that. They're interested in the project. They're a good contractor.
Is it possible for you to email me a copy of this presentation so that I can make a hard copy and take it to Mr. Steers?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Other questions? How would you like for us to proceed?
Those things might take you all in.
What's that?
If we got any more questions, get back with, I'd hardly get a few days to think about it. What do you think, Ms. Baker? I think it's no question, we know, I mean, we all here know that we need a school, and probably not even worth saying anymore, we've said it so much, but. I agree, yeah, I know, I was shocked too with the price of the, what it came in, I'm not gonna tell you a lie, I thought it was pretty high.
You and me both,
So,
no question.
but, the timing with the low interest rate, I mean, what did we get the other day? 1% money, I mean. On something like that. So, we're never gonna get money that cheap again, so.
So I guess we'll see you guys on October 8th.
So just a quick calculation, my guess is at 1%, even if we had been able to build a school at say 30 or 28 or 29,000, if the interest rate had been 3 or 4%.
Pay cash for that.
But even if we were able to build it for that, if the interest rate was 3 or 4%, we would have probably still spent the same amount of money overall.
Well, we got 1% on that utility bond.
Yeah, we won't
because of the amount.
Yeah, I still
basically.
think.
I think we got Ted back here. He might be able to help us with a projection of what we would get, but we're probably around 2.
Should be under 2%.
Under 2.
Just a little bit.
And then we have no idea what 4 or 5 months is gonna look like right now,
Right.
but
Yeah.
if you were to look at other bond rates over the last year, all over the map.
There's been a lot of volatility over the last year, but, you know, we're at, you know, historically low rates for municipal borrowing.
What do they tend to average? Is there an average? Is that a silly question? Or what's a high?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many is it a 10-year loan or a 30-year loan, and the average is going to be very different. So,
But typically, in terms of what we were borrowing for the school, what would you expect if the borrowing conditions were the same? What would be the average bond rate? So we know, how long would you apply?
We're looking at 20 and 25 years.
Okay, so 25-year loans. Over the last year, what would be the average bond rate?
Maybe in the low threes, because remember, we had a very large increase in rates in the March, April timeframe.
And I'll say pre-pandemic, early March, late April, we built our model based on, I believe, 2.85%. That's what we went going in. Then pandemic hit and they were up in the upper threes, some point in mid threes, all over the place.
So, someone who's the best number cruncher, if you were in the mid 3.5, and then you were looking at what the borrow rate would be now, give us some information about that. If you don't have to do it right now, maybe that's something we want to hear about, but it would be, what difference does it make if we're all chasing this 1%? The question I would have on your end would be, what would that look like if it were 3.5%? Because that's the risk we'd be willing to take if we don't want to be in the fall pool. Right?
That's what I'm saying, for the length of the loan, how much
Is that, I see, Thomas, you're kind of going, no? Is that not right? Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Is it?
First. No.
Where's your calculator? Your
I don't like my
calculator.
calculator on. I did not. Still, that's, I mean, what do you think the difference would be?
I'm not following.
What 8% increase is, say, $30 million?
A 1% increase?
It's probably what you say, every 1%.
Give me a minute.
Larry will be done in 30 seconds.
Normally, I calculated the other day, 0.5% was 65,000. Because I was just doing the calculation to figure out the movement.
That's the annual debt service.
On 20 million?
Or
No, that was, I can't remember how much that was, but it was, I think it was 24 million.
Could be amortized, I mean.
Yeah, I can't do anything without my computer. And my calculator won't do that. It just quit on me.
Thank you.
So, just so you know, try to text Mr. Spears asking you a question. Ms. Barber, where do you want us to start the work for? If he responds, then I'll send it to you. Off the top of my head, so, and I'm not gonna throw a number out. I'll give him the presentation and the conversation and get back with you on how he feels. If you have any other questions, we've extended an invitation for everyone to talk to you.
It probably would be a good idea, just each one of us meet with somebody to see what you're actually looking at doing, because you can't get in public before they, what you think.
Well, I
savings
think
could be.
it'd be great. I think it'd be great to have, Mosley, even if we bring you in virtually, I know that's a lot, but we could bring you in virtually
We'll be glad to participate and support
to a
Power.
call. And we want every single question you have, whatever you need to know. I just made a note because I really want to understand those Chesterfield numbers better, because I just feel like we're missing something. I mean, I hear you and I know what DOE posted, but I'm surprised unless they're building a school for, again, it's back to class and 400 kids or something like that. I don't know.
794,
Pardon?
794.
Yeah, so I have a question about that, so we're gonna follow up on that.
And they're updating 2020, but there are 2 high schools on there now, so, and the costs are
But we can.
significantly higher, but you can't compare high school to it.
No, not those two high schools.
And not those 2 high schools.
I know those two well.
So,
Tucker and Hollis.
Yes, sir. Same site replacement, 21 months. Mr. Katokas kind of, it was kind of advertised, kind of what the number might be. too. So, but they were very difficult projects and they had to be done. And the market responded accordingly at the time. So, but yeah, they're same site replacement, and that's a completely different ballgame in terms of square foot cost. It's very, very complicated projects. Because they're based on Glen Allen High School that we did 10 years ago. So we revamped it, but that was a greenfield site that was about 26 months in construction. So we're asking them to do same site replacement in 21 months. So there's a cost to that.
we've contacted the VDOE on those Chesterfield schools to get under the hood with the data that the VDOE has. So while we're sitting here, we're looking.
All right.
Both of those projects, those schools, the budget for those schools is bigger than our county budget.
Yeah, if you follow back over this lot, I'd like to.
Right.
Like 110 million.
Yep.
Yeah, the construction cost is not insignificant.
So are y'all comfortable with us meeting 2 at a time to get things going and
Absolutely.
share information or whatever the case may be?
I'll make myself available.
Yeah.
These guys are great to work with, either virtually or in person.
And I think the financing thing is, not to be a dead horse, but I think it is a big deal of the projection of 1% versus 3%. And that's a real number of cost savings if you go into that pool, which significantly changes the cost of the debt service, obviously, of doing that, at 27 million versus 30 million versus 35 million. I mean, that's huge. That's a big number over a 20-year period. If you're saving $30,000 to $40,000 a month in a mortgage payment, because really that's what it equates to. You would save roughly about $30,000 a month at 1% versus 3%. So that's $360,000 a year in certain debt service. Yeah, times 20 over the life of the loan.
Which would be less expensive than.
It's not that much.
The lower amount at a higher percent. Just things.
No
Well-
question.
But that would be a good amortization to run for 20 years on a $30 million project.
You can truck me, I'll run it.
So yeah, if that could be, we've got some homework to do, and we welcome setting up meetings to go over, all the details. We have lots of details that we wanted to go over tonight in closed session. We're really sorry we're not able to do that. And if you guys could just give us an idea of what the cost savings would be, because it's a variable you guys have to think about. That would be great.
That feasibility, you guys vote on the 8th. It is now the 31st. We're opening school virtually, but still, we trying to get this done before the 8th. Yeah.
Next week, we're talking about.
So maybe this week.
A week
Yeah.
from tomorrow.
What you're voting on the 8th, is just saying that you would like to borrow up to a certain amount if the interest rate is no higher than a set limit. It doesn't lock you into anything. Again, you're not locked into any certain amount until that October 6th date. And you'll get your action.
We were gonna make it happen. I just wanted to be clear walking away.
So October 6th is the lock-in.
That's when we need to commit, well, I shouldn't say lock in, that's when we need to commit to a number. We'll lock in our interest rate on October 20th, I believe, when the bonds are sold.
That's right. Just real quick, the Board of Supervisors is scheduled to hold a public hearing. That's required by the Virginia Public School Board. And that does have a not to exceed dollar amount published in the paper. And that will establish the legal limit of any borrowing unless you hold a new public hearing. There will also be resolutions, 2 resolutions for the county board to consider on the 8th. One for a BPSA pool program, one for a BPSA standalone. If they're not prepared to act on those resolutions, I think we've decided to back that up to their September 30th work session. But October, really it's October 5th. You've got to have, the board has to have taken action. So it's not like Rodney can call on October 6th and say, here's what we want to do. The board had to have met, and I believe the only scheduled meetings between now and then are the 8th and the 3rd.
So if we knock these out by the 18th, that still gives you a whole week and some days to do any follow-ups.
And Ted brought up a good point, which I did mention too. There will be 2 resolutions, one for the pool and then one for the standalone. Standalone gives us a little more flexibility as far as borrowing anytime throughout the year. Now, there's a little more cost associated with that.
Don't you have to get a bond rating for that?
You have to get a bond rating, which goes into the cost associated with that. But it does give us a little more flexibility if we don't meet the full schedule.
But there's no guarantee, do you have a guarantee on the interest rate on that?
It'll be based on the market whenever that.
Right.
Well, if we want to say not to exceed, board has the availability to say not to exceed 2.5%, if it comes into 3.
Then it's running.
Gotcha.
Gotcha.
We'll make that happen on. Sure.
So moved.
Ms. Martin, will you poll the members, please?
Mr. Evelyn,
Aye.
Mr. Tiller,
Aye.
Mr. Steers, Mr. Lockwood,
Aye.
and Ms. Page.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. So, hey, Noah, we're taking recess.
Okay, oh, yes, ma'am.